Good dag, allesammans. God dag. Så i dag er jeg her for å snakke med dere. Og jeg vet at det står i timeplanen deres, det står Black History Month. Men Black History Month er det ikke i mars, ikke sant? Vi er nå i Women's History Month. Så jeg vil si til alle sammen som er her, gratulerer med Women's History Month to all the fantastic, badass Norwegian women out there. Yeah, and when I say badass, I'm saying it in a positive way. Norwegian women have the most fantastic attitude towards equality and fighting for their rights, and I fully appreciate that. Okay, let's get started. I'm not going to take too much of your time because, come on, exam is coming, right? It's coming, and we need to work on that. So I'm going to try to be brief in what I'm going to say, and then you're going to watch an interview. See some of my students in a room like, oh no, not one of those. It's going to be a bit different this time. So what I have to talk about today is a bit more than what you're used to. I'm going to start up with your hands if you know who Martin Luther King is. Rosa Parks. Yeah, we're not going to talk about them today. I want to see hands up for people who know the history of slavery in the world. Yeah, we're not going to talk about that either. So what we're going to talk about has something to do with everyday life and how we treat those around you. I don't know if many of you know, but we are now a Dembra-skola. Do you know what that is? Some of you know what that is, right? Yes. So we are pro-democracy. We are pro everything that has to do with positivity in a school environment. We're against racism, and we're against anti-Semitism. And we want to create a very comfortable environment for everybody. And that's part of the reason why I'm here today. One of the assignments that we, part of the staff, as members of Dembra had, was to read a book. This book was written in Nynorsk. How many of you love Nynorsk? Oh, I see a couple of hands up in the back. Kudos. Yeah, I never studied Nynorsk, but I was able to read that book in its entirety. The book is called Jeg snakker om det hele tida. I probably completely butchered the pronunciation of that, but we're going to bowl straight past that and on to what we're here to talk about. So, without further ado, I'm only going to say a few things, then you're going to watch the interview, then you're going to go back to your classes where you were supposed to be with your teachers. Okay? So, we're going to talk about something called microaggressions. Missing a G. There we go. Microaggressions, and we're not going to go too much into them, but I'm going to give you some examples and you might understand. Within the scopes of microaggressions is something called the fear of the black body. Has anyone ever heard of that before? Everyone here has TikTok? most of you. And if you have come across a video that there is a man talking about wanting to go date women, and he will date anybody as long as you're not fat or black. And that's kind of hurtful and unnecessary in today's world where we have plus size women on the runway. We have black models everywhere. But the world is still Eurocentric to a great extent. And that gives people an advantage. I can live with that. That's just how it is. Flaunting that white privilege is not cool. And it comes off as a microaggression. And I don't know if you understand what I mean by flaunting it. So I'll give an example. So I had a person talk to me sometime in my 53 years on this earth. So do not be thinking, oh, did this happen last month? No, there have been several occasions over the course of 53 years. This person comes to me and says, I think I'm going to move to this country because if I go to this country, I can take advantage of everyone there because I'm going to be king over there. And then one of my friends who was around from Ghana, he got very offended by it. And he said, why would you say that to us out of nowhere? Oh, because, not you, but people in this country where I'm going, they're going to treat me better than they treat you. All right, even if that's true, why would you offer that piece of information to someone who is a person of color, right? Let's go with the not so. I'm not putting a microaggression in the same level as killing a black person. I'm not. But I'm saying it's not fantastic. Now, some people innocently might commit a microaggression. Okay, so I don't know if everyone can see the bag, right? This is a Christmas bag that I like to carry around between all the Christmas days and until the 6th of January. It has a black Santa Claus depicted on it. So I had some kids at the door. When they saw Black Santa's bag, they started giggling. And I'm like, why are you giggling? You're laughing at Black Santa? And that they were. Were they trying to offend me? Because you're laughing that Santa was black? Probably not. But somebody else might have gotten offended by that. I don't have that much time. Move to the next one. The fetishization of the black body. Have you heard about that before? Well, I'm not seeing any hands up in the room, so I'm going to go ahead and explain. So, people think that they're making a very nice statement. They're paying somebody a compliment with certain phrases, but they're not. They're fetishizing a person, especially when they say this. And this is something that I've been hearing people say to women of color very often. Oh, I love me some black woman. I love sleeping with black women because black women have a big behind, because black women are hornier or whatever. And they think it's appropriate and a compliment to say that to a black woman. Well, it's not. You're fetishizing the women, and that's not good for anybody, right? This also happens with males. If you have your phones, I give you full permission to pull them out right now. Have you heard of the case of Courtney Clenny and Christian Obonsali? If you do a quick Google search, Courtney Clenny, she was an influencer. Not anymore because she's in jail. She was an influencer, and she was, oh my God, I don't even know how to start. She was also an OnlyFans model. And she had a boyfriend called Christian. He was a black gentleman. And to make a long story short, because we don't have that much time, she killed him. And one of the things she used to say to him every time that she was mad was to use the N word to attack him. Well, she was just trying to push his buttons. Well, she was just trying to insult him because she was hurt. There's no justification for a racial slur, okay? So if you're mad at somebody for whatever they did, if you have a choice between telling them to F off and calling them the N word or calling them any slur, just tell them to F off. If you bring race, religion, or gender, or if you bring any of those aspects that make them special, if you bring that up as a slur, you're acting racist, even if you're not in your heart. So if you're not racist, why do you want to act racist? Anyway, I don't have a lot more to say. Well, I do, but I don't have much time. And we're going to watch the interview now. But thank you so very much for listening to me today.
After reading this book,
who is the author of this wonderful book. Oh, welcome everybody. We're here today with Kamar Youth, who is the author of this wonderful book. And I can't pronounce the name of it properly, but I'll try. Ik snakker om det hele tiden is her book. I'm always talking about it. I talk about that all the time would be the translation. So please, Kamara, tell my students and my colleagues something about yourself that you feel they should understand after reading this book.
Something they should understand about me after reading this book. I think, well, it's important to note that I wrote this book quite some time ago. It was published in 2018, if I remember correctly, which is now suddenly 7 years ago, which is some time within like the context of how we talk about racism in Norway. So I think that something that is good to know about me after reading that book is maybe that when I wrote the book, I was feeling quite lonely in trying to find a language to talk about something that is painful and traumatic, but that I also had this fear of that this book would be received into a void, and that nobody, not even people that shared the same experiences as I did, as I write about, would understand. And I think it's important to note that now 7 years later, when you read this book at this time, that feeling does no longer exist for me. I no longer feel lonely when I talk about the themes that pertains to this book. And I think that is even though the book can be quite depressing, sometimes funny. Important to note that it's also quite a lot of hope in the book for me now. That was a long answer, but yes.
So I'm going to start by asking you your perspective on something that is very personal to me, but it is now part of the history of the community where I work. I know that no media outlets or print media have ever talked about this, but I am the first Black person to teach at both schools, Selbu Videregående School and Selbu Ungdomsskola. And it sounds like something so small, oh, so what? But it is a big deal on so many levels. Have you ever had people of color as teachers throughout your years in school? If so, where did they come from and how were they treated by the students? Were they respected in the same way their white counterpart teachers were?
Never. I never had a teacher of color growing up. I never had a kindergarten teacher of color. I never had a teacher of color in elementary school, in middle school, in high school. It never happened in my life. So it was first when I started, while I was in high school, I was part of establishing something called the Mangfoldige Scene, which is a theater school, a theater academy, a youth theater for children. And one of my main goals of creating that space for children with minority backgrounds was that they would have also teachers and role models with minority backgrounds teaching them how to express themselves. But in my life, I never had a teacher of color, no.
I sometimes feel that as a person of color, when I go in front of an audience to speak, or when I am in a position where I'm the one giving information, I am not always received in the same way. So there is something that happens in that communication model that is not the same as it is for people who share the same ethnicity. That's why I asked. And it's interesting that you mentioned when somebody like me comes in to teach, people would expect me to be teaching children of different ethnic backgrounds, but I am here, Blacker than Wesley Snipes, teaching children who are Norwegian for the most part. And at first, it might be a shock to some kids, and some kids don't even know this. So, but there is a difference. That's why I asked you. In your book, you describe incidents when, although the N-word wasn't yelled at you or any other racial slur was used, and you felt discriminated against nonetheless. As I told you, I saw myself in those instances because it happens often. As I buy a more expensive ticket to board a plane earlier, and I'm questioned every time. And so some people think racism is just when you call somebody by a racial slur. So I'd like you to explain to my colleagues, to my students, and to people who don't understand that broader concept of racism, what that is.
Well, I think that what was very important to me when I was choosing which kinds of material, like what kind of a racist incidents should this book be compiled of? Because of course, even though I have chosen, like it's very curated which incidents I have chosen to write about in a long life, of course, or long life, I was 29 when I wrote it, long enough life. There are many more stories to talk about than just the examples I chose. But I think one of my main focuses while I was curating and it sounds weird to say curating about like your own trauma, but while I was curating my own trauma in that book, I had spent a lot of time going through the curriculum of how you talk about racism in high schools in Norway, because I had been touring quite a lot, touring schools with a performance that I had been doing. And I realized that almost exclusively, if you were within a class context talking about racism in Norway, you were talking about the murder of Benjamin Hermansen or the 22nd of July. And if you were using other examples about racism, then you were looking to South Africa, or you were talking about the United States of America. And I think that if the only material or the only stories that you talk about when you're talking about racism is the murder of children, it becomes very difficult to identify any kind of racialized behavior within yourself if the only context you talk about racism in Norway is the murder of children. So for me, it was very important to try to put together the smallest of examples and the bigger ones to show that it's the sum of all these incidents that shape your life. And even though there is a text called the rope Taue in the book that also pertains to a very, very violent happening I had with neo-Nazis when I was young. I would say that what defines my day-to-day behavior is much more how I navigate my body on the bus, on the train, in the store, with a stranger, taking my clothes off at the gym, that it's these kinds of incidents that shape my life and shape how I navigate my body even more than those big, very easily talked about, but then sensational happenings, if you could call it that, that people don't have to identify with, because you would never murder a child. But that's not the consequence. That's like the extreme consequence of racism within a Norwegian setting. But it's the day-to-day behavior of the people around you that affect how you live your life and your quality of life. And that was the conversation I wanted to start with this book.
I was interested in exactly those moments because I felt I could really understand so well, and it felt so familiar to me, because when I tell some of my colleagues or people who don't share my ethnicity about certain things, when I talk about being discriminated against, and people say, no, but maybe it wasn't because of that. When everybody goes right past the cash register with big bags, but my bag has to be open so I can show the contents of my bag. Oh no, they do that to everyone. No, but they didn't. They didn't do it to the 10 Norwegian people that went ahead of me. And people don't realize how terrible that is. And when I complain or talk about it, I don't find an outlet, as big an outlet as I find, for example, when I'm in the States or when I am in Brazil, here in Norway. So it is refreshing for me to not feel so alone, reading that and knowing I am not alone. And so I love that you included those instances. Let's talk about when you travel to other countries. Do you see different types of racism? Because there are different types, there are levels. We have something that in Brazil is called veiled racism, that is not so open and explicit, but it's still there. Do you see that in other countries?
Oh yes, definitely. I think it's also, I think some of the most, if I can say, most fascinating instances of racism that I've experienced has also been in those contexts where I don't have the cultural understanding of the setting that I'm in to understand that I am being discriminated against. And I think that was when me and my sister was traveling in Japan in South Korea, I suddenly realized that like the different nuances of how you, not just like one thing is, slurs, but how you disrespect or make somebody know that they are unwelcome can in some instances be in a bow. And I don't have the cultural bilingualness to understand that within a Japanese setting. So it was when we got some Japanese and Korean friends that went with us to stores, to restaurants, and they got upset because the waiter was so obviously for them, making it clear that me and my sister were not welcome in the establishments. But for us, it was just this kind of veiled politeness that we couldn't code. So I think that to know that there are in every country different aspects of how you communicate dismay or enthusiasm, that's it's difficult to know from beforehand. But I have also, when I have traveled with friends of mine who are white, experienced also that if we want something done, or if we want something like in traveling in Thailand with one of my closest friends who is a blonde Norwegian lady, and just realizing that we couldn't get a taxi together. She had to go to the road and get a taxi and do the price and and then when that agreement was made, she would open the door and she was like, now, and then I would just come run and jump into the taxi just to make sure that we got the taxi, because it was completely impossible for me to get a taxi on my own. To realize like these kinds of different cultural settings of navigating your body, and then also knowing that you are traveling with a Norwegian passport and the Norwegian economical privilege of being European and Western when you are traveling. Those two clashes, they're a party.
Absolutely. I recently traveled with my daughter, and I have already filed a complaint with Norwegian Airlines because of how we were treated. And it's usually, I don't like standing in line and waiting for a service, because then I get to experience very often the difference in treatment. And that was really traumatic for us. But I have a voice that I use, and I think there are different types of protests of how you can make your voice be heard. You can protest in different ways. I write very long letters and letters of complaints, and I do a lot of that when I feel like I need to. And let's talk about discrimination on a different level. Let's talk about the hierarchy of colorism. My mom, she just passed away in April. She was light skinned and she had green eyes. And people would say things to me and to her and say, oh, what a pity that she doesn't have your eyes and that she's so dark. Or something like, well, she has the good hair, but a pity about the eyes. So the hierarchy and how people are perhaps treated better the lighter their skin is. Can you elaborate something on that?
Well, I think that the intersectionality of discrimination is complex and difficult, because there are so many sums of us that coexist at the same time, that will always be in like this kind of like, I don't know, Chinese checkers with the rest of the world, jumping over different colors. I think a lot about, when I think about the complexities of discrimination, I think a lot about a conversation I had with my brother years ago, because I am both a woman of color and I am queer. And my brother is a man of color, but he is straight. And growing up, he was very homophobic. Culturally and aggressively, he was just part of his environment, and the guys he hung out with was a very, very homophobic environment. We had a very, very tense relationship based on that. But then I remember that when we were in our 20s and we were talking together and he was going to look for an apartment, he was wearing a pink shirt. And I remember asking about the shirt, and he said that no, but when I go for the apartment, I make sure to say that, like, I'm moving because my ex-boyfriend got the last apartment. And I was like, are you pretending to be gay when you're at job, like apartment interviews? And he said yes. And I remember being so angry that he, with his homophobic path, could co-opt the black, gay, queer body for an interview and how and why. But then he said, within this context, when I go to look at an apartment and there's this Norwegian couple that's going to rent it out, if I come as a straight black man, I'm dangerous. But if I come as a queer black man, I am RuPaul's Drag Race, and I am Yes Girl, and I am someone they want to save, and I need a place to live as well. And I remember thinking that within the black and white, like within the context of blackness that we grew up with, Muslim, black in Norway, the homophobia against the queer black men was rampant. But within a Norwegian context, it is easier to navigate as a queer black man than it is to be a straight black man in some settings. So I think like the complexity of discrimination, colorism, identity, and where you are at any given time is ever changing, which also makes it ever exhausting because you have to be hyper aware of how you are read in different contexts. And then we all know that if you watched like any Disney movie when you grew up, if there was a bad guy, they were darker. And if there was a good guy, he was lighter, even though everything happened in India or in like in Aladdin. Jafar is very, very dark, and Aladdin is very, very light skinned to be this kind of street boy. So to see that like what is perceived as good and what is perceived as evil is in many instances black and white, but how we navigate our bodies together is just 50 shades of, I don't want to say gray, but everything in between.
And we are at a time now where there's so much accessibility to information. And we have now my students, they're all very familiar with TikTok and Instagram, but I'm saying TikTok first because there is a lot of bad behaviors that are acquired on a platform like that. And one of them is using the N word so freely and thinking it is okay. So I had my students already, I've lectured about it, and I've had them talk to guest speakers about it. There's still a lack of understanding of the weight of that word. So my question to you is, why shouldn't young white Norwegians use the N word? And I believe that they shouldn't. And I feel that, oh no, but I have a black friend. My black friend doesn't mind. But I feel like if we normalize it, there is a lot of detriment to society that can come from the weight of racism in that word. Your thoughts?
My thoughts, my God, I would be so embarrassed. I would be so embarrassed on behalf of a young white Norwegian in 2025 trying to defend the use of the N-word in their own vocabulary. I would be mortified on their behalf. Of course, as a person of color, I would be offended and I would argue that this is not okay. But I don't know. I think the lack of global awareness, the lack of like social awareness that it says about you if you are over the age of 13 now and trying to defend the use of racial slurs as something neutral within your body, that's the idea is horrifying. Which maybe shows a bit of naivety from my side. I was not aware that this was becoming normalized again. So maybe I'm more shook than I am articulated about Because come on, guys, come on, no. But they do?
I have had people say to me, well, but I can use it with my friends. I have a black friend in the group and he doesn't mind. I've heard that.
Oh, it's like it feels like you're taking me like hostage back to the 90s. No, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it because it makes you look ignorant. It really, really does. I don't know what kind of small environment these guys or girls or the second you go out into the real world and try to use that kind of logic, the world is going to spit you right out. So I would just, for the sake of common decency, but also self-respect of trying to becoming a human in the world, just don't do it. And then there are many, many historical lines you can draw about like what the word means and that your friend also do not make the rules for other Black people, and that does not make it okay. But don't do it. It's very embarrassing and wrong and bad. But mostly it's a detriment to your character as a human being if you don't understand this on your own damn self. But you should really try to just think it in your head, but don't say it, and then at some point pray that you stop thinking it. Bad.
Thank you for this is very clear and it really needed to be said. And if I say it, oh, there comes Pollyanna again with that. Oh, she's so sensitive. And it's just you. My friend doesn't mind that. So thank you so much for that.
No, God, no. So embarrassing. Stop doing it.
So I had these questions to you, but I would like you to first to sum up this interview. I want to say thank you so very much for granting me this interview, and it will help our program here at school with Dembra, and also I think it will spread a lot of awareness. And yes, so if you have anything else that you would like to say.
Oh, I have many things to say, but I think that when it comes to, I've been thinking about your first question about what would I like people to know about me after reading this book. I think one of the reasons I wrote this book was I was, yes, touring, working a lot. Like I've been working with theater and the performing arts for a long time, longer than I've been like an author. So I was very used to doing interviews, being in the media, working with my crafts, and one of the reasons why I wrote this book the way I wrote it, it was because every time I gave a media interview, the journalist would start the interview by asking me, "Do we have racism in Norway?" Which was like in 2015, 16, 17, like. And the absurdity of that question for me was baffling every time. But then every time I had to dumb myself down to start to try to begin the conversation about something that for the interviewer was a shock, and for me was something that I had existential problems wrapping my head around, that me and the interviewer could live in such different Norways, that something that for me has been part of my daily life since kindergarten was something that this educated person had no idea about. And I think that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book in the format that I did, so that nobody could ever ask me again, do we have racism in Norway? And after I published the book, I stopped getting that question. The question I would get after that was, do we have structural racism in Norway? But that's a different question. It's a better question. It's another discussion. And for that, I am glad I wrote it and happy that it has been part of. There are many other books that I would recommend that people read as well, but part of the discussion shaping part of shaping the discussion around what it means to have a Norwegian society, a plural society, which we have always been for hundreds of years, way longer than the immigration that started in the 70s. Norway has always been a multicultural society. And I think that the recognition of that is the next step of the conversation that we need to have. But I do think that the world might be going to hell in a handbasket, but at least part of the discussion is becoming more interesting, I think, around it, because nobody opens into you anymore asking if there is racism in Norway. The absurdity of that is just as embarrassing as being 16 and hillbillying yourself by trying to defend the use of the N-word. Yeah.
Thank you so very much for this. I'm going to edit the whole thing into a format that I can show my students, but my colleagues will see the entirety of the interview because we are educating ourselves, all of us, because I've been here for close to a quarter of a century, but I'm not Norwegian, and I'm always learning more about navigating society here.
Well, I'm just so grateful that you reached out, and thank you for your work, and thank you for continuing doing your work, and good luck with your students and your colleagues, and I hope this was helpful in any way, that you can find some way to make it a digestible meme. Yeah.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Stopp litt, begge to sitter igjen nå.